Every survival story begins the same way, with something going wrong. A plane falls apart in midair. A ship sinks in open water. Ice crushes a vessel into splinters. A boulder traps a single hiker miles from help. In those first moments, there's no heroism, no soundtrack, no slow-motion decision-making. Just confusion shock and a very simple question echoing through the mind. Is this really happening? But what follows is what makes these stories worth telling. Because when everything familiar disappears, something else emerges, something ancient, instinctive, and far more powerful than fear. The human survival system. A system built from biology, psychology, and thousands of years of evolution. A system that activates in the exact moment you need it the most. Today we're going to slow everything down. We'll look past the chaos and fear and break down what's actually happening inside the human body and mind when people face the impossible. These aren't just tales of luck. They're case studies in how we're wired to fight, adapt, and endure, often in ways we don't fully understand until the moment they happen. So let's step into these real stories, and let's uncover why ordinary people sometimes do extraordinary things. There are moments when a human should not survive. Moments when the laws of physics, biology, and probability all seem to agree that this is the end. And yet, somehow, someone walks out alive. We tend to call these miracles. But when you look closer, you start to see something else. You begin to see patterns, quiet mechanisms inside the body, tiny decisions made under crushing pressure, and a kind of built-in resilience that every one of us carries, even if we never have to test it. Today, we're going to explore some of the most terrifying survival stories ever recorded. Not as random strokes of luck, but as windows into how the human mind and body actually operate when pushed far beyond ordinary limits. Because survival isn't magic, it's a system. Sometimes messy, often brutal, but remarkable in its precision. Let's begin with a fall from the sky, literally. On Christmas Eve of 1971, a teenager named Juliane Koepcke boarded a flight over the Peruvian rainforest. The plane entered a storm, lightning struck, and the aircraft tore apart mid-air. Passengers and debris scattered above one of the densest jungles on Earth. Juliane fell more than 3 kilometers without a parachute. She remained strapped to her row of seats as they tumbled through the air, spinning, twisting, and accelerating toward the canopy of trees below. The fall should have been fatal. The speed alone would have been too much for the human body to withstand. But something unusual happened. As she approached the jungle, the thick layers of trees acted like a series of natural shock absorbers. Instead of hitting the ground in one catastrophic impact, she passed through layer after layer of leaves and branches that slowed her descent bit by bit. The seat she was strapped to helped distribute the force across her body, rather than letting it concentrate on a single point. In a strange way, the chaos protected her. Imagine it like slamming into a wall versus plowing through a giant stack of pillows. Both are collisions, but one gives you tiny fractions of time to lose speed gradually. And for a falling human, that difference is everything. When Juliane woke up, she was injured, bruised, and alone in the middle of the Amazon. But she was alive. She stood up, stabilized herself, and began walking. Here's where the second half of her survival begins. Not the physics, but the thinking. Juliane had grown up around the jungle. She understood its patterns. She knew following water downstream would eventually lead to people. So she did just that. For days she walked through muddy riverbeds, pulling leeches off her skin, avoiding predators, and fighting exhaustion. Her survival wasn't just luck. It was knowledge. The jungle wasn't an enemy to her. It was a map she could read. In the end, she found a group of loggers who took her to safety. She survived a fall that should have shattered every bone in her body, and she survived the jungle that should have erased her within days. But she didn't survive because she was superhuman. She survived because she understood the rules of the environment better than the environment expected. Now let's travel from a humid rainforest to the most unforgiving environment on the planet Antarctica. In 1914, explorer Ernest Shackleton set out with a crew of 27 men to cross the Antarctic continent. But before they even reached land, Their ship, the Endurance, became trapped in solid sea ice. The ice gripped the hull. Days passed, then months. Temperatures dropped below -30 degrees Celsius. The ship creaked and groaned as pressure built up around it. Eventually, the ice crushed the Endurance completely. The men were stranded on shifting plates of frozen ocean with no radio, no shelter, and no realistic chance of rescue. They should have died, all of them. But nobody did. Shackleton understood that survival in this environment wasn't just physical, it was mental. Cold kills in two ways. First, by freezing your body, and second, by breaking your will. So he focused on maintaining structure, routine, purpose. Every day had tasks. Every man had a role. Even when there was nothing left to do, he created rituals and responsibilities to hold the group together. Why does this matter? Because humans rely on something called a microclimate. Not just the physical kind, like layering clothes to trap warm air near your skin, but also the psychological kind, a climate inside your mind. If you believe you're losing the fight, your body begins to behave as though you already have. The crew insulated their bodies using layers of wool seal fur and tightly packed clothing that trapped warm air. They built makeshift shelters out of overturned boats. They huddled together for shared heat. Every choice was designed to slow the escape of warmth from their core. For over a year, they survived like this, drifting, waiting, enduring. Shackleton eventually took a small crew across the freezing ocean in a lifeboat to get help. It took weeks of rowing, navigating storms, battling cold, and climbing mountains. But he succeeded. In the end, every single member of the Endurance expedition survived. Their story isn't just about braving the cold. It's about engineering resilience out of routine leadership and the science of insulation, both physical and psychological. Now let's move from ice to water. Endless, empty water. In 1942, a Chinese sailor named Poon was working on a British merchant ship during World War II. The ship was torpedoed by a German U-boat, and Poon found himself alone in the ocean, clinging to a small wooden raft. No food, no water, no land in sight. He drifted for 133 days. To put that into perspective, that's more than 4 months of sun exposure storms, dehydration, hunger, and total isolation. So, how did he survive? First, he managed hydration, the most urgent challenge. Humans can survive weeks without food, but usually only about 3 days without water. Poon collected rainwater using improvised containers. When there was no rain, he used evaporation, spreading seawater thinly on surfaces, letting the sun evaporate the water and licking the condensed droplets. He was essentially running a miniature desalination system with his hands and whatever scraps he could find. His second challenge was food. He crafted fishing hooks out of wires from the raft. He used tiny metal pieces as lures. And when birds landed nearby, he caught them with traps made from rope strands he twisted together. He even used shark liver as a source of nutrients. Not because it tasted good, it didn't, but because he understood that at sea, calories don't care about taste. But the real enemy wasn't hunger or thirst. It was isolation. Human beings are social creatures. Deprive us of human contact long enough, and our minds begin to break down. Poon fought this by creating tiny tasks. Every single day he gave himself something to do. Tie this rope. Clean that surface. Check these knots. Inventory the supplies. Micro goals to keep the mind anchored. This strategy is actually backed by psychology. When your world shrinks to the size of a wooden raft, giving yourself structure is what keeps the abstract concept of tomorrow alive in your head. After 133 days, fishermen finally found him off the coast of Brazil. He stepped off the raft, sunburnt thin and exhausted, but alive. Later, when asked how he survived, he simply said, "I didn't want to die at sea." Sometimes survival is nothing more than refusing to let despair make decisions for you. Our fourth story is something different. There is no vast ocean, no wilderness, no storm. Just one man, a rock, and a canyon. In 2003, Aron Ralston was hiking alone in Utah when a boulder shifted and pinned his arm against the canyon wall. It weighed hundreds of kilograms. He couldn't lift it. He couldn't move it. He had no way to call for help. For 5 days, he rationed his small supply of food and water. The desert heat dehydrated him. The cold nights drained his energy. Time stretched, twisted, and began to disappear. Eventually, he understood something clear and terrible. If he stayed, he would die. If he tried to free himself the usual way, he would die. If he waited for rescue, he would die. The only path to survival was one he didn't want to take, amputating his own arm. Now here's the part people often misunderstand. They assume this decision came from raw courage. But biologically, something else was happening. Extreme stress can trigger a surge of adrenaline, endorphins, and other chemicals that reduce pain and increase focus. The brain enters what's called a survival override. It stops prioritizing comfort and starts prioritizing continuation. In this state, Aron used the tools. He had a cheap multi-tool to cut through his skin muscle and tissue, using the natural breakage point of bones to snap the bone in his forearm. It was excruciating, but his mind in override mode treated the pain like background information. Not irrelevant, just not controlling the decision. Once free, he climbed out of the canyon, rappelled down a cliff, and hiked until he found help. He lived because when the moment came, he acted. And in survival psychology action, any action is often the dividing line between living and dying. So what do these stories have in common? What connects a girl falling from the sky, a crew stranded in Antarctica, a sailor drifting at sea, and a hiker trapped alone in a canyon? At first glance, nothing. Different places, different dangers, different people. But beneath the details, they share a set of survival principles that every human being is wired with. The first is the fight-or-flight response. When we're in danger, the body floods with chemicals like adrenaline. These chemicals sharpen vision, increase oxygen flow, and temporarily boost strength. They also narrow attention, creating a tunnel vision effect that makes complex problems feel strangely simple. This isn't a flaw. It's a design feature. When things fall apart, the body cuts out unnecessary information so the mind can focus on immediate action. The second principle is the rule of threes. It's a simple guideline in survival training. 3 minutes without air, 3 hours without shelter in extreme environments, 3 days without water, and 3 weeks without food. Almost every survival story can be mapped onto this framework. The body fails in predictable order. Knowing the sequence lets you prioritize the right actions at the right time. The third principle is psychological resilience. This isn't inspiration poster resilience. It's the ability to break giant, impossible problems into small, solvable ones. It's the discipline to focus on the next step, not the next 1,000 kilometers. Nearly every survivor describes a mental shift where they stop asking, "What if I die?" and start asking, "What can I do in the next 5 minutes?" The fourth principle is context knowledge. Juliane knew how the jungle worked. Shackleton understood his crew. Poon understood the ocean. Ralston understood his own limits. Survival often comes down to knowing just enough about your environment to avoid the most dangerous mistakes. And finally, there's the simplest principle of all the will to live. Not in a dramatic sense, not a Hollywood speech, just a quiet, stubborn refusal to give up. In every story, there's a moment when the survivor decides that death is not acceptable. That decision is a spark, and sparks are how fires start. Most of us will never fall from the sky, sail alone across an ocean, or amputate our own limb to escape a canyon. But these stories remind us of something universal. Every human body, including yours, is carrying a set of ancient tools designed for endurance. Tools built over thousands of generations of people who faced danger and somehow survived it. Survival isn't supernatural, it's human. And if there's one thing these stories show us, it's that when things go wrong, really wrong, the body and mind are capable of far more than we imagine. So ask yourself, if you were in one of these situations, what part of you would wake up? What choices would you make? And how far could your survival instinct carry you? Because these stories aren't just about other people. They're about all of us. When we look at these stories from a distance, they feel almost unreal, like something that could only happen to a specific kind of person. Someone naturally tougher, smarter, braver. But that's not what the science says. Survival isn't reserved for the strongest. It isn't a talent, and it isn't a personality trait. It's a process. One that every human being is already carrying around quietly, waiting in the background. What these survivors did wasn't magic. They made one decision, then another, then another. Small choices stacked like stepping stones leading away from danger. And if these stories teach us anything, it's that when fear takes over, the most powerful thing we can do is take the next step, no matter how small it feels. You don't need to fall from the sky or drift across an ocean to use these lessons. The real world is full of smaller challenges that test us in quieter ways. Moments when things collapse unexpectedly, when you feel stuck, overwhelmed, or completely alone. And the same principles that kept these people alive, focus, clarity, adaptation, and refusal to surrender, can carry you through your own storms too. If you'd like to explore more stories like this, or dive deeper into the science behind human resilience, let me know. There are countless survival narratives that reveal even more about how we function under pressure and how we endure. For now, just remember one thing. You are far more capable than you think.